Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of together and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together. I am here with the incredible Jen Risher. Jen, everyone knows you as the woman who's written the book, We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth. But I think also more interestingly, as one of the co-founders with your husband of Half My DAF, which I think really just paved the way for people to think about giving and investing and just really thinking about money in a different lens. I'm so excited to have you here today on Getting Rich Together. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Shama, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I think I've seen you on stages now a handful of times, and every time I see you speak, it is always from this place of vulnerability, authenticity, talking about the ways in which you've seen and looked at money. I'm so excited for us to start from the beginning of your life and start to find all the ways that really led you to being this incredible woman who you are today. So with that, let's start from the beginning. Darling Jen, take me back to a young girl who was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, discovering the world. Where did she live? What was she doing? What was your family like?
Yeah, let's go back. I mean, it makes me think we all go back to our money story, right? That's where we learn our habits and beliefs. It's when we were little and watching our parents and learning what we learned about spending and saving and giving. And so what I was learning as a young kid was not to talk about money. We didn't talk about money. That was impolite. I grew up in Seattle. At least the first 5 years of my life were in Seattle, and we lived in a middle-class neighborhood. My father worked as an insurance broker. My mother had stayed home with me when I was born, and then my brother was born. And yeah, it was very stereotypical of the roles that my mother and father played. But money, my mother had grown up not talking about money. There was definitely like the right and wrong ways of doing things. She had learned from her parents, kind of an upper middle class family. Her parents had met in college. So my grandmother, her mother had gone to college, but her father didn't let her mother work because at that time, ladies were supposed to stay home. So she was very smart, capable woman. So she was on the board at the hospital, but she wasn't supposed to work. She wasn't supposed to care about money. She wasn't supposed to think about
But
or
yet
talk
being
about
on the
money.
board of a
And that-
hospital, Jen, I mean, that, it's so interesting because while she may not be getting paid to do this, as you know, being on boards is a lot of work. So even though she had like a job, she wasn't allowed to have a job. Right. Anyway, continue. I just find that so fascinating.
It's interesting you bring that up because I think partly she didn't have a job because it was about money. And if you weren't making money, I mean, that's why ladies in that era weren't supposed to need to make money because the man was supposed to be bringing home the money. So yes, she was working. She had a real job, but it wasn't being paid. My father, meanwhile, grew up when he is the oldest of 5, and his father had dropped out of school in the 8th grade and kind of worked his way up in a bank. And his mother was a high school teacher, but she left work. So they didn't have a lot of money. And my dad remembers rushing to the dinner table so he could get enough to eat because there were 5 of them. So there was always this sort of scarcity, never enough. So both my mother and father brought their own money story to me and passed a lot of that down. So it was a lot of saving. I remember my first job was picking up leaves off our walkway and putting them in these paper bags. And when my dad got home from work, he would count them out, 2, 4, 6, and I got a penny for every 2 leaves I picked up. And so that was my first money that I earned. And I remember putting that money in my piggy bank. And I remember when I had $1 And the next memory is like my mom being so proud that I could write my name, and that meant that I could go open a check, not a checking account, a bank
Wow.
account, and deposit in the bank. That was so positive. Like I was old enough to write my name. That meant I could open a savings
How old were
account.
you when you
Um,
got to write your name and open up that account?
I must have been 5 or 6, putting
I can
money
just
into the
imagine a
bank.
little you walking in with, your pennies and your dollars, and it's a big moment.
Very
Yeah.
right. And actually, at that big moment, my grandparents told me my mom added $50 to my bank account, which was huge. So I put my money in. She added this $50. And then my grandparents said, we're going to put $50 into the stock market. We're going to put money into Montana Power and Light. And we're going to watch to see which money grows faster or bigger. So I was learning right from then that yes, my savings account was going to make whatever it was making at that time, but the money in Montana Power and Light made more money
Wow.
over time. But all of that over time, it was all about not touching that. And that was the primary lesson I took away from my childhood of save, save,
Wow.
save, save, save.
How interesting and how incredible to have parents and grandparents want to teach you the value of how the stock market works differently at a young age. Because even if you don't understand, let's say, the mechanisms or how markets work, even just looking at numbers over time, right, one can start to draw some conclusions about where might you want to keep your money. And even now today, I'd say that's probably a great lesson for almost everybody, right? Put $50 here, $50 here, and let's see where things turn out. So when you were in high school, did you find yourself really, were you super studious and focused in your studies? Were you getting a part-time job? How did you start to approach these early years of exercising yourself in the world?
Yeah, I was studious. I was a good student. We had at that point moved to Oregon. My dad had a vision of becoming a farmer. He wanted to till the land. He bought 20 acres and planted a vineyard. So we were living in the Willamette Valley, rural Oregon. I went to a very rural high school. There were 45 of us in my graduating class. And I was a student, and I was in the honor society, and I took private French and Latin classes and got nothing but A's, and I took all the hardest classes that they offered, which weren't many. So I was very studious, and of course, in the summer, I got a job. I worked at a fruit stand for a number of summers, and then I would go in to Portland with my father, which is about an hour commute, and I worked at an insurance company, filling in for people as they went on vacation. So I was like, did some work in the mailroom, and then I was helping someone else do something in wherever there was need.
I love
College.
that. I think what's so interesting is often we always tell young people or, suggest like try different things to figure out what you're good at or what you like or get that sort of variety of things. And it sounds like you were able to taste a lot of different things early to understand how business works or how organizations operate. And also, obviously, what it's like to make money as you're performing these different functions, which is really cool. I'd have to say, like, most of the time, at least for myself, for working in high school, it wasn't lots of different kinds of things. It was like, I'm going to do this one thing and get this one deep experience. But it's so interesting to get a taste of so many different things. So, coupled with this genius brain of studying Latin perfectly, which I have to tell you, I studied Latin as well in grade school, not perfectly, but I was like, okay, this has to be good for something. So, I'd love to find out what you found as application for Latin. But combining that with sort of this idea of work and money is a really interesting confluence so early. So, as you were getting ready for university, were you already very fixed in terms of this is what I want to study, this is where I want to go? I sort of see career paths ahead of me. How well informed were you, or how objective were you about what was to come ahead?
I was not well informed. So the idea was go to a liberal arts college, love the love of learning, learn, it's all about exploring and learning. Career was never a thing. My mother Although she got her master's in library science and worked at the Seattle Public Library for a year before I was born. She was not like her mother. She was not after a career. And so that was sort of given to me. I never heard, "Oh, you need to think about what you're gonna do after college," which was a blessing because I could just explore and learn and enjoy my classes. I don't know if I could do it again, I might have been a little bit more focused on where do I wanna go? What sort of career do I wanna build? Because I spent a lot of time taking incredible classes, but I didn't really focus on any one particular thing.
What were your favorite classes?
I love philosophy. I love the things that don't really lead to an obvious career. I was an art history major. I took a lot of philosophy classes. I liked culture classes. I spent my junior year abroad, first in London and then in Florence. So art history was incredible because there I was in front of all the art that we had been studying. So really fortunate to be able to do that. And then when I graduated, I recognized that I didn't know much about Asia. I didn't know anything. Really didn't even know the difference between Japan and China. I mean, at that time, our education system was so European centric, and the art that I had learned about was very European focused. So I was like, I don't know anything about this. So I applied to a program that got me a job in Tokyo. And it was the most incredible experience. I went over there for 2 years and really loved it. It was such a different culture. There was incredible art, and yes, it was I taught in the mornings and the evenings, so then I had the day to explore and get to know Tokyo and art classes and cooking classes and
Oh my gosh, Jen, this is so dreamy. Okay, so you're getting paid to explore a new country, make new friends, teach, which is not easy.
no.
Teaching has its own challenges, but certainly to have a once in a lifetime experience and get paid for it, which is like so incredible. And so at that time, the money you were making, did you just find yourself sort of saving it, or were your living expenses very high at that time? How were you sort of looking at, okay, this is going to go to my savings account? Or was it like, I actually need all of this money because rent is expensive?
Well, it was really interesting because I went over teaching for this steel company, and it was a big company, Nippon Koken, and they had a whole nursing staff, and this nursing staff was housed in dormitories. And so part of my salary was I could stay in the dormitory. And I had a 6 tatami mat room, which is a room with just 6 tatami mats in it and a bathroom. So that was part of my salary, but this was a time when Japan was taking off. It was ahead. The yen was so strong and I was paid in yen. So my salary was huge. It blew my mind. I was making so much money right out of college that I ended up saving a lot of money. It was like enjoyed what I was doing. I got to travel and I saved so much money that when I came home, I could buy a car, and he helped me do that, but I mostly paid for my own car, bought it outright because that was what we would do. No, never go into debt if you can help it. And I also had money in the stock market. And my father suggested Vanguard Health. It was a Vanguard Health fund. And I put $12,000 into this Health fund. And here's another learning because of compounding returns and the way the stock market goes. That money, I held on to it. I never spent it. It was over $1 million.
My gosh.
Time and just letting your money grow on its own it's definitely a lesson that people should take to heart.
I mean, Jen, that is, it's so funny because I feel like in so many articles and, all financial educators are always like, look at the math of the compounding and here's how it works. But it really takes hearing people's stories.
Yes, it really is true. It's true.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so here you are, this young woman who's already creating a financial base for herself, part by circumstances of putting yourself right place, right time, great advice, this generationally built-in language of save your money and don't spend all of it. So all these things are coming together, but you certainly don't go on to become a international English teacher. This is not your career path. Your life decides to take a different direction. What were some of the decisions that you made, and what were they motivated by to switch and to start to build your career differently?
hmm Well, when I got back from Japan, I moved to Seattle with a very good friend who's living in advertising because I was enamored by Bewitched. This is a show, maybe you're too young to know what Bewitched was.
I know Bewitched.
Jared Stevens was an ad man and Samantha was the witch. And so seeing the fact that he was like thinking about how people buy things and jingles and advertising, it appealed to me. Just watching ads, it made me think that such so cool. So I was very interested in advertising, and coming from Japan, I had this money because I had made money with this yen. So I started looking for an advertising job, and it was very difficult to get into advertising. And I finally got an interview, and in that interview, they were saying, "Well, we like you, but there's just nothing open right now." And it was unusual at the time. I said, "Well, I'll just work for free. I want to like learn and be part of," and I could afford to do that because I had this from Japan. And that was the best decision because I worked for free for this one agency, and across the street was another agency. I got to know people, and then a real job opening came up, and I went right across the street and interviewed, and I got into McCann Erickson as a account coordinator and started my advertising career. So I was very excited to kind of be on this path.
Wow. How long did you end up working for free before this opportunity came up?
It was about 6 months, I would say. It took that long. And when I got my job, I got paid $19,000 a year. And then it was a thing, like, I'm very frugal, which is what I learned from my childhood. This was the time when Starbucks was taking off, lattes were a thing. I allowed myself 1 latte a week because that was just too expensive. And I remember a number of us would park, like, 8 blocks away at the cheap parking down the street because that's how we could save money. Or we'd take the bus and we'd bring our leftovers for lunch. And I did not spend money. First of all, I didn't have any to spend. But I was very, very strict because I had to be at $19,000 a year. And I had my apartment and this car, and which I rarely drove because gas was expensive.
So, at this first job, did they offer you the 401k benefits packages? Were there things that you were able to opt in on early in your professional career?
Well, it's interesting. I don't remember that from my advertising year. It was a year and a half maybe, because when I do remember is getting a call from my friend who was working at Microsoft, and Microsoft was the place to work in Seattle at the time. And she said, there's an opening coming up in recruiting. And I was like, "Oh, I don't want to work in recruiting." And at Microsoft sounds really great. Maybe I could work in marketing. Maybe I could move. So I was like, okay, I interviewed for that job in recruiting and actually got the job at Microsoft. And what was the salary? There was like 29,000 a year, which is so much. I mean, that was like so much more,
Yeah.
so much money. And they had all these plans like the 401k plan and employee stock purchase plan. And so everything that I could, I maxed out everything because that's kind of what you do. And I got this crazy thing called stock. So this was like, the story is I started on a Monday. They were hiring a lot of young people. The average age was 30. Every Monday was orientation. And at my orientation, July 15th, 1991, I met my husband. So I met David that first day, although of course there was no way I was going to date anyone I worked with. That was sort of like not going to happen.
Of course. Not to
No,
Jen, who's like, got it all buttoned up,
no,
got her balanced checkbook.
that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, I was very on the job. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And then I realized that the stock it was crazy. People were making a lot of money, but no one talked about it. It was not okay to talk about it. We weren't like those bankers on Wall Street making money on money, and we were out to change the world. We were putting a computer on every desktop. We were building software. It was a fun job. I was in recruiting, which ended up being a really fun job because I went out to business schools and told people about Microsoft, and then we brought people back and went through the interview process. So I ran the interviews, and it was a fun job. And at the same time, in the background, the stock price was going up, and it was going up. And my money, suddenly I had like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stock. It was all numbers on paper, but it was like this crazy thing that was happening. Meanwhile, David had started from business school. His stock was worth millions. And so
Oh,
this crazy thing was happening to us. Fast forward, we got married. And when we were expecting our first child, David decided he wanted to leave Microsoft because he had a guy that he knew in college and was really interested in books and technology. And this guy was like building this thing like to sell books on the internet. And so David joined Amazon before it was public as the 37th employee. And then two babies happened. We had our first daughter, which was incredible. And then also Amazon went public, and found ourselves in our early 30s with more money than we could wrap our heads around.
wow. Oh my gosh, Jen, it's so incredible. Congratulations. Like to be able to take risk and to see also your husband can like be a builder, right? And be able to take these interesting, incredible risks and see these incredible upside for you as you were navigating through almost this like I'm gonna say dissonance of like we are making all this money with these stocks, but we have the day job and we're performing. And when did things start to more materially change for you, right? I feel like there was a moment where it goes from, okay, we have to really budget or we can't do this to, okay, let me feel more secure with this, and like, okay, we can do these things and then feel incrementally more secure, right? What were these levels of, let's call them financial and emotional security that you went through over this time period? Because I imagine things probably changed a lot and quickly.
Yeah. Well, you said emotional, and I think money is very emotional. It brings up a lot of emotion. It brings up fear. It brings up anxiety. It brings up joy, excitement, pride. I mean, it's very sensitive. And so while it was sort of amazing, I also found myself not wanting anyone to know. We had this new daughter. I joined a mother's group, and it was like this whole curtain had lifted, and I was in the world of parenthood. And I was like blown away by being a parent, the love I felt for our daughter, all that I was going through. And I was in this world with all these other women, and we were all going through the same things together, the highs and lows of having a new baby, and how are we going to sleep through the night, and what are we going to do about our in-laws? And we shared so much. And that was a space where I felt very connected and a sense of belonging. Like we were all new moms together. And at the same time in my life, this other world had opened up to me. I had incredible new wealth, and that space was quite silent. And I didn't want
Yeah.
anyone in my mother's group to know about that because I felt like any other new mom. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be othered. I just wanted to belong and connect with these women around me. So, I didn't talk about it, and I did everything I could to keep it hidden. And I felt like that it really was
Wow.
something because it really triggered a lot of what I had learned growing up. And what I had learned growing up is good girls save their money. They are responsible with their money. They aren't those people who are flashy. And there is definitely a kind of bias against rich people, which I had then become, but I could not, that my identity was at stake. And it really was a long time grappling with who am I, and how can I handle this thing? And you said, how did things change? Like we stayed in our same house. I think David bought a car a couple years into this. It began to change, and then we started to travel more and do different things that obviously we wouldn't have been able to do, but there wasn't like a huge change in kind of well, certainly in who we were, and that was another thing that came up for me. I was like, "Oh, no. I'm gonna become an obnoxious person." I really believed that because that's what I saw in the media. I mean, the movies and the media that you see, what rich people are not likable. So I was worried that I was gonna become that person because that's the image we have of wealth, and I've since really learned that money doesn't change you as much as shows you who you really are. It amplifies what's there. It really took starting to look at it and write a book about my experience because that's the other thing. I was like, what are other people doing about this? Because there's also, are my parents looking at me differently? Are my friends looking at me differently? Like, they're jealous and like give money to my parents. How much should I give to a parent? How do I think about philanthropy? Am I gonna spoil my kids? What's gonna happen? So all these questions I didn't have answers to, and I was like, "Where's the book? Where am I gonna learn what other people are doing and how they're thinking about this and how they feel about this?" And there really was no book. We don't get enough honest human stories, I'd say, about any money situations. And I think it's really powerful. We learn from each other's stories. I mean, there's a lot of parenting books out there, but not a lot about what happens when you suddenly have more money than you had when you were growing up. Right. Well, I didn't. I didn't want my parents to know, but obviously I actually, I guess, was waiting for them to make the first move or say something or mention something like when we went to Europe or we bought a second home and there was never a like, wow, they never brought up and I never brought anything up. And I didn't bring anything up because I really felt like I was a bad person in their eyes. The money was not something good, not something that they would celebrate. And I think the first real conversation I had was when I wanted to give them money. It's really hard to give someone money without admitting that you have it. And I was scared to do that. I wasn't sure what the reaction would be. But when I talked to my father first, because that was just he was the one that talked about my money. My mom doesn't talk about money, aren't supposed to talk about money. We gave him $20,000 and it was like, oh, like I thought he would like fall over or yell at me, or didn't know what to expect. And this is like obviously a little girl in me, like having these worries. But he was very thankful. And he said, maybe your mother and I will go business class when we next fly or something like this. And thank you very much. And then I had a conversation with my mother and she put it all on my dad. Oh, your dad is very happy about this. And, it's really kind of helped him feel
She kind of
she
deflected.
deflected, which is not surprising. And with my brother, we also tried to give him money. But he went into the Peace Corps and then he got a master's in Spanish and he was a Spanish teacher and he was going to buy a house and we wanted to help him with his down payment. But he refused our gift. He said he wanted to live within his own means. And this refusal was exactly what I feared because it was like, oh, he's saying that your money isn't good, or I don't want to be part of that. Or I wish I had spoken to him at that point, but I just couldn't. And we just didn't have that conversation. We've since had conversations about it. And certainly my book now that I've really outed myself and really truly understand how important it is for us to have these conversations because, first of all, when you don't talk about something, you it tends to kind of hide in the dark, and that's where shame grows. There's a lot of shame that can grow when you don't talk about something. Think about things that you don't talk about. And the other thing with not talking is that you often make assumptions. You start to tell yourself stories about things and, oh, she's doing that because of this and that. You don't really know what someone else is thinking or feeling unless you address it or ask them. And so that's also such an important thing because what do we ultimately want? We want connection with each other. And so that's what's going to bring us happiness. And if money is getting in between our authentic connections, that is a real problem. And so I felt that in many ways. And even though it's messy because we don't have practice and it's sort of been a taboo subject for so long, we can do this thing. And the other thing that happens when you're not talking about money, it gives money so much power over us. When we do talk about it, then it puts it in its place as a tool that we have at our disposal. So we need to put money in its place, and it's like calling it out and saying what's really important. And the thing that's important is, even though this conversation makes me really nervous, I really want to address this with you because I care about you. Is often the perfect preamble to a money conversation. Yeah, well, I think it was first getting clear about my money story, the emotional piece. I don't think you have to write a book to get clear, but I ended up writing a book and it took a long time to get it published. So once that book was out in the world and I had shared my emotional journey with new wealth and money and what I was feeling, and I was talking about that, I was like, okay, wait a second. What is our money doing? What am I doing with this thing? At that point, I really looked at it and I was like, okay, here's this portfolio. What am I invested in? How do I ensure I'm not invested in harm? And it became really interesting to me because I recognize its power. And when I could think about not just investing in Vanguard Health or whatever's going to make me money, but actually I can invest in things that can make me money, but it can have an impact and it can align my values with what I want to see in the world. So it's like, okay, I had never really thought investing was that interesting until I recognized women have a really hard time raising money. If you're a woman of color, you're going to have even a harder time. And so many markets are being overlooked, perspectives are being overlooked. There's talent out there. I want to invest with women of color and I want to invest in people who are raising that first fund. And so I started searching for them and I started networking and I've invested with 5 different women of color who are first-time fund managers, and it's been amazing because they look at the world differently. I mean, invested in, women's healthcare and future of work and health tech and fintech and different areas than I think men tend to invest in, and they're gonna be investing in ways that men don't necessarily think of investing. I've also invested in underserved communities. So the investing piece suddenly opened up to me. And you asked my thesis. So I found this interesting. I don't know, but all my life in a male world, we do live in a male world. And I've been very like, that's my goal. I'm gonna head towards that goal. Very focused, linear, goal oriented. And in this last 5 years, since my book has been published, I've found myself, and I think this is more feminine, like, okay, what's the zing? Where's the interesting thing here? Oh, money. Oh, ooh. At first, I was like, I'm going to get out of all harm. And then that didn't give me what I was looking for. And I was like, oh, it's much more interesting to me to invest actively in things that can make a difference and make a change. What's the next thing? Where is my heart taking me? Where's my head taking me? What's the next best thing? So it's felt much more organic, but one thing is leading to another thing is leading to another thing. And most recently finding a really amazing community with Women Moving Millions. This is a organization where every woman has committed to moving money, moving $1 million over the course of 10 years towards gender equity, to advance gender equity. And that is philanthropically, through investing, through advocacy work. I've met some incredible women in the space who have been at this work for decades and who are just starting out. So everyone is on this journey together, but at different points, I guess. We work with a financial wealth management firm, and they have invested for us. And going in and looking at some of those investments and saying, "Oh, wait a second, I want to put a screening on that to ensure that that there's women at the top level, or that it's climate friendly." Or so doing some of those anti-harm screening things in things we were already invested in, and then saying, "Okay, I want to like move out of that." I mostly let them do their thing, but I've also said, I'm also going to pull this and I'm going to do some venture capital investments. I'm going to invest in some CDFIs that are working in communities where people are underserved. And I've invested in several ETFs, social justice focused, that are climate focused, that are more women friendly. I'm still staying in my lane. I'm not an expert here, but I do have the ability to move things around and make sure that my money's doing things that help create the world I want to live in. As best I can do that. And then with my philanthropy, it's much more like, okay, what do I believe needs to happen? And there, I'm really focused on equity, racial, gender, and economic equity.
That's so incredible, Jen. What a wonderful model you are for how to. I almost think of like, you know, Spider-Man, where it's like comes great power, comes great responsibility, but with wealth comes a sense of responsibility to how you see the world and this ability to change it, to materially be able to create the world that you do want to see, which I think is really incredible.
I want to say thank you to you, because I think one of the things, you don't have to have a lot of wealth to change the world. And it's one tool. And I'm very thankful I have it because it is powerful. But I think there's so much that we can do no matter how much money we're moving, using our voices, our narratives, tapping into our networks, showing up. I mean, I think as women, we need to own all our powers, and that's our talent, time, as well as our treasure, right? So I think another key piece of shaping the world you want to live in is really listening to yourself, trusting yourself, and using your voice. And so I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast, because that is a huge way to show what you want to create in the world. And it is more conversations about money, and it is advancing women and helping them see their power. So kudos to you.
My question was around where you get your information from. You know, you are so involved in so many capacities, and it is so inspiring. And yet I imagine to someone who's listening, they're like, okay, but how do I start? Where do I go to figure out, you know, what to do, or the different ways to start to think about your values? Because essentially what you've done is married your capital with your values, and you are really living into that. But where are you finding your information, or how did you start even when you were like, you know what, we're going to start screening for these things, right? Where did it come from, and where are you learning?
Okay, well, thanks for that question, because it sort of harkens back to what I was trying to say. I don't know how eloquently I said it, of like how the way, instead of like seeing that goal and like how am I going to get to that goal, I have started with what's in front of me. And so it really has been learning through just showing up and being present. So it's like showing up and being present. It's like, oh, I know nothing about investing. Okay, let me start learning about this. I don't know. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have something that was like, I didn't know where I was going, but I just took one step after that and the next, because it can feel very overwhelming if you think, okay, I've got to get it right. We tend to do this to ourselves as women. I can't do anything until I really understand everything, or I have to do it perfectly. And I'm saying, no, I really have learned by doing. I very much a doer. So I'm going to do this and see where it takes me. And then I'm going to do this next thing that as it presents itself or as I discover it. learning and continuing growing and walking the path, I guess.
I love that. I love that so much. As you have been saying yes to so many things, I'm sure there's also a number of things you've had to develop, maybe a stronger ability to say no to. I'd
Mhm.
love to sort of understand a little bit more the lens, I'm sure also philanthropically, right? It's like there are so many important organizations and people doing such incredible work. What are some of the ways in which you have started to embody or start to exercise no?
No is so important. We need to say no. We need to say no for so many reasons. Okay, so how do I start here? I think one thing that has come to mind is how do you say no? And I think starting from for me, learning that self-care and taking care of myself and making sure that I am finding joy in what I'm doing and that I'm finding energy in it has meant no to meetings before 10 o'clock. It has meant guarding my time. It has meant taking that shower or like it's that I've built boundaries that there's self-care boundaries. So that it means saying no, but it's all in the service of caring for myself because that's where I have to start if I'm going to do more for others. And then the idea that no for philanthropy, because my husband ran a nonprofit for so long, I saw him fundraising and how hard it is. And you ask someone, and then he would like then go out for dinner, and then he'd show them the data of how this was all for like someone who was never going to give them money in the first place. So it's like you want to be respectful enough of someone who is asking you to say no. It's the nicest thing you can do for a nonprofit to tell them, look, and you can have your answer. It can be like, this is not an area I'm interested in, or I am at capacity at this moment. You can come up with your way of doing it that feels good to you, but knowing that it is the best thing you can do for a nonprofit that's asking you for money, because then it frees them up to not spend any energy on you. They can move on to the next person and feel good about it because it really, and I think in general, women need to say no more often because it is a show of boundaries and self respect to say no.
Absolutely. So, as we're talking about, you mentioned your husband, obviously, conversations around money at home, have being a mother, having a family. What are some of the ways in which you introduced wealth and money management and some of these tools that you really honed in on as a family? What are some of those family meetings like?
So I have two daughters. They're 27 and 25. And if I could go back in time, I would give them more structured financial education but that didn't happen. It didn't happen. But now we have a lot of conversations and they're mostly emotional conversations around money. They are out in the world and have questions and they also have a lot of feelings around they're very fortunate too. And so being around friends who can't afford the things they can afford, or they also, I think one of my daughters is still in hiding, and being open to having those conversations with them, acknowledging, just holding space where they can talk about something. Like my older daughter at one point was working in a jewelry store. She was making jewelry with a group of coworkers, and they were sitting around. They were doing the jewelry making, and the coworkers were saying, I can't afford rent here." They live in New York, and everyone was complaining about how hard it was to live in New York. And she was sitting there and feeling guilty. And she's like, I just feel so guilty. And allowing her to say that to me and listening and being present with and talking about, as a mom, you always want to fix everything. But I've recognized there's a lot to be said for just holding space for someone and being able to help her think about how guilt is. What is that doing for her? What is it doing for anyone else? How else can she show up? Or how she's like so happy when she can spend money with a friend and like take them out for dinner, and how it's been so nice to be able to do that for people. So those types of conversations, I think the small details that add up to helping my daughters think about their own path and their own kind of money questions.
I think it's so interesting. It's like often the children that we parent in this world, they're born in with likely different circumstances than we were born into. But yet, as a human, we never go unscathed with our own traumas. There's always something. So it's like you may be fine in one area, but something's gonna get you, right? Depending no matter how you are born into the world and what those circumstances are. I would love to turn our attention to the future. Today we live longer than we ever have before. Jen, I imagine you'll be on this planet till a nice young age of maybe 103 or 104. You're certainly heading there now that you're crushing all these tennis games and I mean I don't know I could see another phase of a longevity conversation about how Jen Risher is going to be 110. But I would love to have us reflect back at a nice young age like that, and would love for you to tell me this body of work that you're now creating and this legacy that you're leaving on the planet. What might that look like? What is it that you would like to leave here?
Well, I was still thinking about my daughters, and I guess that is appropriate because they are my legacy. Just like like you said, it's this genetic, like I am part of my mom and they're part of me, and we definitely pass the good and the bad, and it does happen. Hopefully I've made some shifts for them, and then they will make shifts and grow as a generation. Like you said, their money story is different from mine. They grew up they're growing up in a different world. And actually, when I think of being 100, I hope that this next generation, my daughter's generation, has saved this world for us. I mean, they have such a beautiful way of looking at everybody. They're so inclusive. They want opportunity for all. They demand things. They are not what we were. They are asking for life work balance. They're taking care of themselves in ways. When I was growing up, I don't think anxiety existed. Now, the mental health, they really are addressing things. They're looking at themselves. They're caring for each other. And I'm hoping that they will save our planet.
I would love to ask you a question that is, I think, one of my favorites, because often we talk about money in ways that are oh so serious. But my gosh, we can certainly have a lot of fun with money too, Jen. I would love to know your most enjoyable, fun way that you get to spend your money.
Well, that would be experiences and travel. I feel very fortunate to be able to do interesting things. And actually, last week we went to the Super Bowl. So that was fun. And I realized that it was the first time I had watched. I grew up, my father and my brother did football bets. We had the football on TV all the time. It was always on. It's the first time except for in high school, when I went to high school football games, it's the first time I've been in person at a football match. And it was really fun to actually watch the game. And it moves so much more quickly than it does on TV because there's no ads. I didn't miss the ads. The Super Bowl ads can be very good. But it was really a really interesting and fun experience. It was very positive. So giving myself those types of experiences is just so lucky. I'm a very fortunate person. So I really enjoy living life to the fullest. And I feel like I have the ability to do that.
That's so awesome. How fun.
Neither are my husband's not a football person either. So it's sort of like, well, let's just go. And we would spend the day in New Orleans, which is an interesting city. And so it's really a great experience.
Oh my God, I love that so much. And then my final question for you is really around what we, the audience, can do for you. You're up to a lot of big stuff. Women moving millions, allocating resources towards important organizations, funding emerging funds, ensuring innovation has a chance at success from diverse and brilliant leaders. What is it that you are calling in? What is it that you need right now? What can we do for you?
That's a nice question. I have to throw it back because I'm assuming you have a lot of women listeners, and I would hate anyone listening to feel like, oh no, I'm overwhelmed. I'm never going to get there. I think the biggest thing you can give me is looking into yourself and seeing the most amazing person you can see, because that is so true. You need to find that amazing person within you and trust and move forward, not with knowing exactly where you're going, but trusting that once you take one step, you'll know where the next step needs to land. And talk to other women, lean on other women, find community with women who will lift you up and who you can lift up and who will hold you accountable. So I just trust yourself and trust those around you. And yeah, I think it's been so important to me. I want everyone to have that same sort of sense of self and trust and community.
Oh, that's beautiful, Jen. Thank you so much for sharing your story today. It was and is beautiful and dynamic, and there's so much more life to be lived. And I'm so excited to see all the things that you get into. Thank you for being here today on Getting Rich Together.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about myself. I mean, it's such a gift.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe. And if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.